A dream mantles your shoulders with uncertain stars, while the moon, macular, sure, awake, cross-fading gray to slate the mists that mass about your mountain gods and dissipate, assigns data points across a month of nights. Of dream and datum my story takes shape. Jacobo, dreamt-up hero, roams a global landscape, and in Data Point Guantanamo, Navy base awakes. He's not Jack the Hobo, gringo, but I won't disdain your gaffe. 90% of perception's a peripheral dreamt-up guess. Datum, Jacobo begins with Jota, a hot Hispanic H, but no offense. After all, dreams must hazard umbrage, attend the catastrophe in grotesque disguise, wake us to what is, while throwing shade on rational conception. So, while I know more than most about assembly lines, I can only dream how Jacobo, indigenous Lebanese of Ecuador, chases his American dream in a poultry plant of Delaware, how he flies when Inmigracion calls. Birdbath wash-ups, galvanized exhausts, however, are data-gathered mounting stairs to pee, smoke weed among my Autoplant vents, and dare now apply to dreams of planetary solidarity. What's split in infinite calibrations of who's got more, who goes bust of gender, color, and distrust. What we are as peoples, no self, layered with a sediment of time and atrocity, of the long-nosed leaving the flat ears, fording a full moon's tide for better forage, and coming back with battle drones. Solidarity is a decolonization of whatever side the river, whatever class you're mired in, a lucid dream where you dispose across a planet populated by all the braided rivers of your I and thou. Note, my data sometimes noted, other times epigraphed, and even incorporated, for the cold lexicon of a Guantanamo detainee assessment merits as close a read as a coroner's report. So, welcome to a home of data point impacted earth where Mama Pacha, Jacobo's mama, dreams the oral tradition of Jacobo's father Elias and of a man who pissed on his merchandise in Guayaquil in datum 1899, of Guantanamo detainee assessments pairing colonial nightmares with our poor bastards' data, of Phoenician genes and what Lebanese of Maronite data points dream of genes, of unending strife and what a priest dreams up concerning what the data points reveal Christ is. Of fractured tiles, and what Byzantine boy King Constance II pined to mend with edicts, of Lieutenant Captain Colonel Wells, who, with Vietnamese French Boku jargon, army surplus, data point war, went native. Of Jewish Olga Fish, who exchanged for ovens a folklore store on Avenida Colon, named for pirate that exchanged peanuts for potatoes, silver for slaves whose sons were chicken catchers, exchanged for Mexicans and machines, of how artist Uncle Pop's skein of obligation Layla, teen queen and our hero's love, was lost the night shift Jacobo made the Duncan for Joseph Biden's Gujarati, and ice arrived. The scent of warm bread is everywhere, of maize or barley chime, of millstone, metate, respiration and frass, of germ and fungi, our Precambrian kin, umami of palm sweat, clay, and oven cinders of Mother Earth breathing. Hermanos pastorales, Philistinium, exiles at home or where you've flown or been stolen to, I'm here to dream a story. Welcome, everyone, to this video introduction to my new book, Jacobo the Turko, a novel in verses published by Broken Turtle Books. Welcome, bienvenidos, ahlan wa sahlan. This presentation is based on a Zoom rollout for Jacobo the Turko that took place on June 3rd, 2021, the date of my book's official release. In short, Jacobo the Turko explores in verses the braided rivers of human kinship by tracing the misadventures of Jacobo Bitar, a young Ecuadorian of blended heritage and naive dreams, as he pursues the American dream working on the beaches at Rehoboth, Delaware, only to land in Guantanamo prison. As you just heard in the preface, Jacobo, dreamt-up hero, roams a global landscape, and in Data Point, Guantanamo, Navy base awakes. The work earned me a Delaware Division of the Arts Established Artist Fellowship in Poetry and the DDOA's support, and indirectly that of the National Endowment for the Arts, helped me to complete this work despite its many heresies. The impetus for this work was first my outrage and disgust with our country's morally, militarily, and politically unhinged reaction to the attacks of 9/11, the racism, the Islamophobia, the mendacity, and the cruelty of destroying Iraq and building Guantanamo detainment camp. That left me with the issue of what resources I had as a Navy brat, an autoworker, an educator, an artist, and an activist to respond to this travesty. What values would guide me and aesthetic tools could I muster to address such a fraught topic without getting bogged down in some tragic and turgid polemic, and instead create something redemptive, something that addresses the hard data of violence and stupidity, but evokes a redemptive dream of our common humanity, of our not quite certain redemption worthiness? Write what you know, they say. And what I know is that I have always been a bit of an outsider. As a U.S. Navy brat, I was the new kid on the block through 13 schools, 13 different cultures, and even a couple languages. It thus seemed evident to me that there is no one way of life. And as a corollary, every way evinces its share of tragicomedy, though its denizens may see their world as the best of all possible. At an early age, many of the books I read stirred my social conscience. Books like I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang by Robert Elliott Burns, Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, and Candide by Voltaire, a work that certainly influenced Jacobo the Turko. In college, I joined the Anti-War Students for a Democratic Society and then began serially dropping out of college, getting married, and then humping the assembly line at Chrysler, which I did for 31 years, and learning a lot about repetitive motion disease, which my Jacobo suffers after one day of tugging chicken breasts in a Georgetown poultry plant. I also got to know and deeply care about several thousand UAW Union sisters, brothers, and indeed in between, who spoke in accents acquired in Appalachia, Latin America, Mississippi, and Yemen, to name a few. Both SDS and the assembly line, by the way, figure in my Autoplant, a poetic monologue, which I have performed many times over several decades. On leave from Chrysler, my wife Joan French and I taught, made friends, and even gained family among Ecuadorians from bourgeois Quito to indigenous Peguche, the Otavalo town that features in Jacobo the Turko. Incidentally, successive waves of Lebanese have immigrated to Ecuador since the 1860s, and a decade and a half after Ecuador and a year after retiring from Chrysler, Joni and I arrived to teach in Lebanon. There we found a land of 14 disputatious confessions and made friends among them all, including Druze merchants, Christian phalangists, Orthodox mountain folk, Hezbollah shopkeepers, and Palestinian refugees in the Burj al-Barajni refugee camp south of Beirut. In 2003, as the U.S. was threatening to bring chaos to the region by invading Iraq, my wife and I marched in the streets with Lebanese and fellow expats and signed petitions hoping to forestall the catastrophe to no avail. After a newspaper published the names of some who had signed the petition, the U.S. Embassy called me in. Some terrorists in a Palestinian camp near Sidon, the security official claimed, were planning to kidnap me. My employer offered to send me home with half pay. But after hiding out on campus for a couple weeks while I smoked a few packets of cigarettes among the fading orange blossoms, we stayed on. My students, whose families had endured 15 years of civil war, were not that impressed by my anxieties. We often visited Syria, a day trip away, and other countries in the region. I have returned a couple times, once just before the 2006 Israeli-Hezbollah war, and once after, when I watched the World Cup with Lebanese friends and heard the city erupt with fireworks and cheers as Spain defeated Netherlands to win the cup. On the way to the airport to catch my plane home, I passed through a neighborhood I had passed through many times before on my way to the Burj al-Barajni camp. Now, between trips to Lebanon, at home in Delaware, I had watched on my TV in horror and rage as Israeli jets, supplied by my own country, rained death and destruction on my friends. And now I saw that Iran had rebuilt the once ramshackle apartments destroyed by Israel, this time with modern and handsome buildings. More grist for my Jacobo mill, grains I had begun to grind. At first conception, I imagined that my Candide should be an Ecuadorian of mixed heritage and a true-to-type naïf, dreaming from childhood that America would provide him a new identity in the home of reason, order, and cool commandos. Jacobo's nickname, the Turko, is a somewhat pejorative palimpsest applied by Ecuadorians and referring to the Ottoman Turks that ruled Lebanon when Jacobo's father Elias, his forefathers, arrived in Ecuador. As for his indigenous side, Jacobo would come from Peguche, a town redolent with history and tradition. The old hacienda mansion is now a nursery, while the mountain gods Imbabura and Cotacachi, their craggy shoulders draped in clouds like this one, stand eternal vigil over the valley. We are godparents to a family of Pegucheños, made friendships there that are going on 3 decades now, and the town has deep spiritual significance to me. Further, I would name Jacobo's mother, Mama Pacha, channeling the novel of that name by Jorge Icaza, whose main character simply reverses the name Pachamama, or Mother Earth. To incorporate both the data of experience and the dream of creative solidarity, I drew on the techniques used by Nicolás Guillén, the Cuban national poet, in his work El Diario que a Diario, translated as The Daily Daily. The work comprises a collection of semi-fictional documents, letters from a colonial viceroy, ship manifests, advertisements for slave auctions, and the like. For example, my first poem, aside for the preface, is Registration Open, which combines an advertisement for summer work in the USA with narrative poetry in the voice of Jacobo, as I might dream him to speak. Except for the address, dates, and phone number, the following is a partly translated ad that appeared about 15 years ago online. Incidentally, a pair of my Ecuadorian in-laws answered such an aid in Quito and worked in Wildwood, New Jersey, not Rehoboth. It begins, Inscripción abierta programa de work and travel a Estados Unidos. Work in the USA during summer months. Improve your English. Gain work experience. Meet people from all over the world. Program for university or post-secondary students to work in the USA during summer vacation. Call 2-250-7144 to sign up for an informational session on Saturday, February 7th, 1300 hours at the Escuela Politécnica Nacional Ladrón de Guevara, E11253, Quito. Requirements: very good English, regular post-secondary or university student up to 28 years of age, and available to travel to the United States from June to September of 2005. Following the ad, Jacobo initiates his narrative, revealing his romantic notions of the USA based on a schematic he found of Levittown, New Jersey, USA, the iconic archetype for post-World War II white middle-class suburbia. Registration open, taped upon the tapia of my mother's birthhouse wall between a window on Pegucci and my peeling scheme of Levittown, USA. Houses like rectangular beads woven in the tapestry of my dreams. To soak in my Lebanese father's medicinal pools, or bathe in womb waters braiding this town with aqueducts, cascades, rivulets, and birthing stains in moonlight. Hello, Pacha, says Moon. You are Earth. Hello, Jacobo. You are your father's bastard. After providing some exposition and more details of his birth and his study of English, Jacobo declares that he will apply for one of those summer jobs, bidding goodbye trousers white and ponchos blue, embroidered blouses and blue wool skirts, mamacitas, gold glass beads and wristlets, coral and carnadine. Goodbye, House of Mother Earth. Hello, American Dream. Besides Nicolaski Yen, the work was heavily influenced by Rita Dove's Sonata Melodica, Evan S. Connell's Points on a Compass Rose, and Eduardo Galeano's Memoria del Fuego. Other works that contributed to my conception were William Carlos Williams's Patterson and Pablo Neruda's Canto General. Indeed, my epistolary poem Julia Quiteño was modeled after letters between Williams and Allen Ginsberg in Patterson, and my line in 1994 An American Oasis, centuries before the horses and helmets, is an echo of Neruda's canto, antes de la peluca y la casaca, before the wig and the cassock. Back to Jacobo's parents. Jacobo's father happens to be a Phoenicianist, a Lebanese who believes that Maronite Christian Lebanese are not Arab but rather Phoenician. In the poem The Confession of Elias Bitar, Elias asked his priest if he can be forgiven for his out-of-wedlock son, Jacobo. Can't I enter heaven, he asks, unmarried to my bastard's mamacita, wade into Jordan with a little sin unwashed by grace, a little monkey in my Phoenician? Isn't Jesus Christo half Jew, half God, but all God's plan? And he runs smack dab into the 7th century disputes on the monothelite heresy that dogged the boy king Byzantine Emperor Constans II, who laments in his own poem, the type of Constans, 17, and I command Byzantium. What a house! The mansions quake, disputing properties of Christ, and scatter the mosaics. Jerusalem sky, propitiate wombs, but lapis blue, carnelian red, adrift. Back to Elias's confession, the priest castigates him for monothelitism and reminds him that the monothelites drove us from our Syrian home to the grottos of Mount Lebanon. We Maronites are Catholic Arabs through and through, with an unbroken apostolic line, to which Elias denies being an Arab, and claims, indeed, every Maronite shows haplotype J2, the gene that presents in all Phoenicia's coastal colonies. Thus, from 100 streams, we bear the traits of our great ancestors, and I don't need absolution for that. These could be representations of Jacobo's parents. On the right, the Lebanese Ecuadorian founder of El Universo newspaper, and on the left, an artistic representation of an Otavalo woman from a mural by Tenas. She reminds me of many of my Otavalo friends, but especially Marina, who baked bread on a stone for my study abroad students a decade ago, something I used in a poem I will excerpt in a moment. Her husband Rafael was once mayor of Peguche and is now a shaman, who gave me a stimulating cleansing just before COVID, complete with wax on my torso with powerful stinging nettle, ortiga, and cane liquor aerosols sprayed from his lips. He also saved the asses of those students I mentioned when they got themselves in too deep with some cokehead, while I slept peacefully through the night. Here is a bit of oral history, as I termed it in the preface, from a poem called Mama Pacha Muinale Malis Contemplates the Lake of Blood, in which she is cooking bread on a hot stone that her forefathers had installed in her home generations before. Feed me bread stone with fire memory, moons of gold on Andean slate, Taitokuna rooted in earth, bake earth that bore my squalling wawa, rash Jacobo, growing hungry as rain on dusty streets. She contemplates all the disasters that empires from Incas to the Spanish have brought on her people. First, how Huayna Capac, the Peruvian Inca who conquered what is now Ecuador, slaughtered some 10,000 Cara warriors at a shallow crater lake, subsequently named Blood Lake or Yahuacocha. She described how Spanish diseases traveled in advance of the conquistadores on highways the Incas used to carry dispatches in knotted cords called quipus, and the civil war between Atahualpa, the son of the Cara queen Pacha, and his half-brother Huascar, and how victorious Atahualpa was quickly defeated by Pizarro. News, 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 Andean clouds unfeeling, abducting sunlight, drag erasing shadows across the Cordilleras on whose waves condors lunch. News, 10,000 works of wombs by Pacha's husbands stripped, disarmed, wading in shoals of blood, Yawar, mountain crater, Yawar, Cocha, clouds unfeeling. News, Spanish poxes, racing Inca stones, knotted quipus, reading death on empire highways, rivers, yellow footpaths, lacing landscape, Huaquinyancuna. News, court-spoiled Huascar, bivouac-hardened Atahualpa, orphaned brothers brawl for ruins, molting armies on the march. News, Atahualpa Legion triumphant, Spanish Cajamarca Royal Square, one day's horse, pike staff, musket, Nuestra Historia Autoctona, to a halt. Queen of Papas and Choclo, now Queen of Dead. Beware, Jacobo, she says, concluding her meditations, the jaws of a hungry world. Now, thematically, I was hoping to reflect creatively the notions of several spiritual conceptions. In his Ishdi, the Israeli theologian Martin Buber posits the idea of an encounter between individuals in the fullness of their humanity, with no instrumental agenda either way, which, to the theologian, is a relationship to God. Similarly, the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches simply how we should encounter our beloved with full attention. However, what inspired me most deeply in the contemplation of all these warring branches of our human tide is a phenomenon of nature, a braided river like this one. It inspired me a vision of our human family with their languages and customs and physical traits and identities diverging and blending like the branches of a braided river, waters that separate from themselves in trickles or torrents for moments or millennia, redividing and rejoining in myriad combinations, and how this process goes back to the primordial slime, the whole history of speciation, a long, soluble braid. This is what I am talking about in the preface, albeit with some tongue-in-cheek allusion to the woke discourse. Solidarity is a decolonization of whatever side the river, whatever class you're mired in, a lucid dream where you dispose across a planet populated by all the braided rivers of your I and thou. Jacobo, Elias, Mamapacha, Boy King Constance II, Pizarro, and competing Incas are certainly not the last in what poet Jim Daniels, in a review of Jacobo the Turko, pegs as a wild gumbo of characters, adventures, politics, and class, and the absurdities and cruelties of modern life. So that's my humanity. If not a braided river, a gumbo. There are, of course, a lot of Delawareans in this gumbo. After losing his passport and pay, Jacobo is selected to join a gang of day laborers. And I was in the van, says Jacobo in my poem, Catching Chickens, on the floor, propping myself with palms in slick straw about the boots of 4 blacks already aboard. "You like chicken?" the boss man asked. "You bet I do." And the black men laughed. Our hero little suspects that he is to catch chickens in preparation for their slaughter. "In the manurery firmament that was the warehouse," he reports, "a single light bulb shone on thousands of white chickens across a sea of dark dirt." After watching his roommates demonstrate the technique, it is his turn. "The chickens, too surprised to be undocile to my comrades, fought me like gamecots, leapt accusing from the sticking shells and left them empty when the forklift came. 'Put some ass into it, Jose,' commands one of his workmates, a gentle allocution directed at me by one of my shopmates in my early days as an autoworker, though he called me MFer, not Jose. During a lunch break, Jacobo reports how the boss man offered me a job cutting wings from chickens, which P-Patch, his imperious workmate, would not do. "Shit, my people did this shit for 400 years. Your turn now, Jose." This sentiment was reported to me by the late Jimmy Miller, an African-American I collaborated with on the UAW local bargaining committee at Chrysler. Miller had been a Teamster organizer in poultry plants back in the day. "Had Our Lady, where is Jacobo, who had lifted me from the river of misfortune, now dropped me in the mountain's fire?" In addition to Georgetown poultry workers, there are an African-American artist and pot farmer, his rapping teenage ward and Jacobo's crush, Layla, a Wilmington Dunkin' Donuts boss from Gujarat, his Chinese shift supervisor, the midnight customers, and several ICE agents who, right after Layla gives him that kiss, finally nab him in the poem, Busted at Patel's. Here's an excerpt. "My wrists bound in plastic snips, the van door slams and cornering hard, the wheels squeal and stones spit. I'm pitched to a floor smelling of boots and shit, but it's the safest place to brace my feet for a rough ride home and a dissipating kiss." "Where am I going?" I yell through the grate. "Back to Lebanon," he says, and I cry, "Wait, I've never been there in my whole damn life, mate." Incorporating a mix of documentation and persona poetry, let me introduce that Lieutenant Captain Colonel Wells I mentioned in the preface. Wells, a Green Beret and cool commando, had impressed 9-year-old Jacobo years before when they met along an oil pipeline. Read the book to find out how. But here Wells, itching to avenge 9/11, notes what's really going on in the poem October 2003. Colonel Lawrence A. Wells, U.S. Army 10th Special Forces Group, reads the business skinny on Iraq. First, the documentation. The reconstruction and humanitarian aid efforts in Iraq are being administered by the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, through grants and contracts. USAID chose to limit competition for the first 8 reconstruction contracts awarded. This was done so that the agency could be ready to provide rapid response to any necessary assistance and services required in the event of war, without complicating diplomatic efforts to prevent war that were being undertaken during the procurement process. Business Opportunities in Post-War Iraq by Michael R. Charnas, Charmaine A. Housen, and Frank A. Verostro, Vinson and Elkins, LLP, September 30th, 2003. Wells is reading this document, which describes what he characterizes as a chance for chicken shit frogs to snag some sloppy seconds after Chicken Hawk Cheney's Halliburton. The figures he recounts and comments on are all factual. He murmurs, USAID grants and contracts, International Resources Group, $7.12 million, technical expertise, chicken feed. Bechtel, $680 million, that ain't chicken feed, rehabilitation, power generation. Kellogg, Brown, and Root, Cheney again. $7 billion. Oil field services, no shit. Iraq, I would have said no, if not for my oaths. And anyway, it looks like they're leaving Osama for me. Fucking dog. Whole world dreams of USA, and this jack-off wants to kill us all. Kid in Ecuador snotted the windows to see an American Jeep, and the old guy made him cry. All guys will make the Iraqis cry. We all will. Now, while I was teaching in Lebanon, one of my duties as secondary English chair was to escort a group of very sharp students to Paris for something called Harvard Model Congress, where these students would role-play American legislators like Joe Biden and Tom Carper. I told you this was hardship duty, right? You know, Beirut. Anyway, on the tarmac preparing to fly back out of Charles de Gaulle Airport, we were delayed when some guy began screaming in the seat behind us, "No Beirut! Philistine!" and other things in Arabic, while several cops held him down. And then one of my students, a Muslim girl who happened to be doing archaeological research on Phoenicians before heading off to medical school, informed me that what he said in Arabic was that he had a bomb. Well, once I got to work on Jacobo, I knew that this would be put to good use. So, in the next poem, I changed the circumstances somewhat so that it is Jacobo on this plane, not me, on the last leg of his deportation to Lebanon, and I replaced my student with a Lebanese bourgeoise with a cell phone. Other than that, this is mostly how it went down in No Beirut, Philistine. The epigraph. It has been suggested that it, Olay, comes from an Arabic invocation of Allah, or the oath, "O Allah," by Allah. However, there is an evident disagreement about this hypothesis. Olay, Wiktionary. A commotion 1 seat back across the aisle interrupts my latest exile on the tarmac at Charles de Gaulle. No Beirut, Philistine! 3 uniformed flicks mash some guy yelling Arabic to his seat. No Beirut, Philistine! Yalla Habibi. What Papa would say, hurry up, darling. But that's all I know of this tongue that is all heaving lungs, choking hearts, and wailing souls. The ICE frowns me to my place. But now a lady in front kneels on her seat, yammering into her cellular the play-by-play in Arabic and French, while the cops humph and the guy screams. "Oh shit," says the lady in English. "He says he has a bomb." Once, On a bench below Imbabura, we watched in safety as a bull slammed a fence, dividing us from head and horn, our olays proclaiming up the mountainside the greatness of the gods, when suddenly the wood rose atop of his horns, his giant nostrils trailing an arc of silvery mucus, and we lifted from our seats to flee. So everyone on the plain lifts from their seats when they hear bam. Mesdames et messieurs, begins a pretty lady cop, and I ask the ICE, are we hostages? No, replies the lady with the cellular who translates. This guy is from Palestine camps. Came in on this plane, and on this plane he go out. If he get off, he go under jurisprudence française. That makes sense. Takeoff takes 1 hour, but once aloft, his and my ICEs head back to business class. He eats his supper with a resigned relish, pokes his screen for a movie. Hamoudi, he says, touching his breast. Jacobo, I return, and touch mine too. We trade our trays, trade stories, and trade our terms for home. Oh, Allah, if only. Inshallah, God willing. In Ecuador, the clouds abide with Imbabura. Below this missile, they falter among some stranger's gods. Regarding these Palestinians, I drew considerably on the thought of Reverend Mitri Raheb in his Faith in the Face of Empire, the Bible through Palestinian Eyes. In this work, Reverend Raheb notes how the people of Palestine comprise a dynamic population, not some essentialist or racialist concept like the 100th great-grandsons of the biblical Jebusites, but rather whatever indigenous people lived at that Levantine crossroads of empire. Actually, the Palestinian-American poet Susan Abu Hawa put it succinctly. Because we were always there. We are the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims. We lived, converted between religions, settled from pilgrims, left and returned, mixed with our conquerors, died by their swords, and nourished our soil with our bodies. But we never left. But we never left. But we never left. My own expression of this idea is in my poem, Al-Quds, where Jacobo and his Palestinian friend Hamoudi visit the Roman ruins of Baalbek, and Hamoudi remarks, we Palestinians endure and don't, like a river. We give them a few decades, or centuries at most, to raise their temples and roll their dice. Call us Philistines, Maccabees, or Fidayeen. Here our battle cries in Phoenician, Hebrew, or Arabic, our curses, pagan, Jew, Monophysite, or Muslim. We inherit the seed of succeeding invaders that disembark, go native, or just go, never changing the scent of leaven in a fired taboon. This is a taboon. Now, I think of myself as a firm advocate for Palestinian rights and a firm critic of the Israeli occupation. However, I recall sharing a meal with my dear friends in the Burj al-Barajneh Palestinian refugee camp, a meal I expropriated for the poem called Meet Hamoudi's Family. Read it in my book. This is the same family, by the way, portrayed in Max Grossroad's beautiful claymation animation film Wardi, or The Tower, which you can rent inexpensively on iTunes or Amazon. Find the links in the description below. Anyway, I remember this wonderful preschool teacher telling me, someone who hated toy guns, by the way, that all she wanted was to return to her grandmother's home in Haifa, from which her family was driven in the Nakba, or catastrophe, 6 decades ago. My first reaction, only expressed internally, was not one I'm proud of. That's unrealistic. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how I was conditioned by the whole colonialist discourse, despite all my progressive credentials, to discount the very just desires of people denied their fundamental human rights just because. Why? Because they were not of the West? I encourage those of you struggling with these issues to check out the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Or if you wish, you can find your local affiliate, such as mine, DELFR, Delawareans for Palestinian Human Rights, led by my Jewish buddy, Dr. Rob Apel, and his Palestinian wife, and equally my friend, Mike. Links to the U.S. campaign and DELFR are in the description. A final notion, one that came somewhat late in the composition, was that of the macula, which my DELFR comrade and ophthalmologist Dr. Abel declaimed to me at length, leaving my brain spinning. All we really see in full clarity and color is just a very, very narrow band opposite the photoreceptor-rich retinal macula, narrower than the diameter of the moon, with all the rest of our visual field being an increasingly imaginary construction out to the gossamer phantasm at the peripheral horizon. A dream mantles your shoulders with uncertain stars, while the moon, macular, sure, awake, cross-fading gray to slate the mists that mass about your mountain gods, assigns data points across a month of nights. It is a poetic analogy more than a literal phenomenon, but to me, it is only the imagination, a waking dream, that can fully engage with those in our periphery, the others. The epigraph for Jacobo the Turko is by Father Daniel Berrigan from his 10 Commandments for the Peaceable. It goes, in times of crisis, the real question is, how am I like others? To explore the question is to form communities of survival or of sacrifice. Before I turn to some questions that have been asked me, let me share one more poem with you, a bit of a spoiler. Jacobo and Hamoudi escaped the Israeli bombing of Lebanon to Turkey, where Jacobo is kidnapped, sold to the CIA as a terrorist, tortured in Bagram, and abused in Guantanamo. In Gitmo, he meets Walid al-Hajj, a real prisoner of Guantanamo, now finally released, whose story here is true, although his encounter with Jacobo is imaginary, as his recitation of the Adhan, or call to prayer. Imagining an early morning encounter like this, an I-thou moment for Jacobo, it's the best I can do. Again, the poem begins with some artifactual documents. Then Jacobo frames Walid's story, comments at one point on the heavy metal music the guards used to disrupt morning prayers, and then mirrors the Adhan's recitation with his own broad interpretation and suggests in the process St. Anselm's ontological proof for the existence of God. First artifact. When a man learns about his purpose in life, from his understanding of his faith, when he observes and contemplates, and he is guided by Allah, he finds himself looking for and pursuing that which is good. I found, after all these travels, that this was my written destiny. I came from Nuba to Khartoum, from Khartoum to the land of the two holy places, Saudi Arabia, from there to Pakistan, to Afghanistan, to Guantanamo, and Sudan again. I see all of this as part of a predetermined destiny. Walid al-Hajj, in an interview by Muazzam Beg, another former prisoner of Guantanamo, regarding the Kala-i-Jangi massacre near Mazar-e-Sharif, Afghanistan, Ramadan, November 2001. Second artifact. The people there in general have a great love for the Taliban. So I started to read some of their literature of the scholars and the history of the movement, and my heart became attached to them. I wanted to help them one way or another. John Walker Lind, captured at Kala-i-Jangi, CNN 7/4/2002. Third artifact. Events at the Kalaijangi fort must not simply be brushed under the carpet like so many other killings before them. Amnesty International, 12/5/2001. After an account of the horrors that Walid survived at Kalaijangi, the Adhan. Though my Arabic was weak, explains Jacobo, I was familiar, and I heard in his tremulous carol my own interpretation. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. There is a oneness greater than all the braided journeys, exiles, blessings, losses, loves, heartbreaks, risings from the earth, and disappearances from justice or even memory than any and every life could bear. A oneness which is that, than which nothing greater can be conceived, that speaks to humankind in every tongue and every dream, in quilted landscape and swelling sea and scudding cloud and molten core. It is the hope that will put our lives in order, preserve them in prosperity and success, the harvest of sweet dates and savory olives, the blessings of a growing family, and the peace of the right path, however masked in the available patchwork of our happenstance. By the way, Jacobo the Turko is dedicated to my dear friend, colleague, comrade, person of letters, of grooves, of radio waves, and prophet of what should have been, Stephen Leach. He is the author of Valdemar's Corpse and many other works on Delaware authors and musicians, as well as his own novels and poetry, and he is the longtime executive editor of Dreamstreets magazine, and that's just a start. I was asked several questions in my Zoom rollout, and I'll attempt to answer them again here. Why a novel in verses rather than prose? Actually, first I conceived this as a prose novel. I've written a novel before, The Mother Earth. But as I moved along, I wasn't really satisfied with the prose, and I began to think of certain models I had seen, like El Diario by Nicolas Guillen. I began to think that maybe I could write, a long poem or a series of poems that constitute some sort of a novel. Of course, I'm always thinking of books like Patterson by William Carlos Williams, although I didn't model it that much on that. A couple references to it, perhaps. And I just decided, hey, I'm a poet. This is what I'm going to do. And I thought, like, I'm going to use lots of different techniques and combine it with all this kind of documentation sort of style. Are there footnotes to document all those references? Well, yes and no. I have a long glossary to explain a lot of my terms, and I have some of these quotations, these epigraphs that are referenced right in the epigraph. Other than that, there's not like a list of works cited. Would I might write more books with these characters? This took me by surprise. They say you really hate to lose this, and your characters, you fall in love with them and all that, but I don't think so. I don't think so. I might, I'm finding a way to write something now that's more autobiographical, where I sort of like look at the everyday things that happen in my life, more or less every day, and how they relate to the big things that happen historically around me. And maybe use some of the same techniques that I used in Jacobo, and building on it. Someone asked me if this could be called an epic. Well, somebody did call it an epic, and I kind of like that characterization. Actually, Diane Seuss, who was the juror when I won the Delaware Division of the Arts Fellowship for Poetry in 2017, she used the word epic, as well as some other very complimentary terms. Who do I expect my audience to be? Well, We all kind of think it's going to be God, God's going to listen to it. I'm not really religious in spite of all my religious inspiration, but it's not necessarily those who really read the top tier poetry that's published today in all the top tier magazines. I tried to publish some of my poems in those, but they weren't interested. But I did publish about half of the poems from Jacobo in the second tier literary magazines or cultural magazines that weren't especially literary. And so I did have an audience, people who really enjoyed that, but they weren't looking for the sorts of things that one learns in Masters in Fine Arts programs. Where is Jacobo now? Well, you have to read the book to find out. But whatever happens to Jacobo, it's not a happy ending, because as long as Guantanamo prison remains open, it's not a happy ending. So, I invite you to leave your any more questions you might have in the comments, and I'll try to get to them. Now, I must say, give credit to one other person here. The starting point for almost everything I've learned about Guantanamo prison is Andy Worthington's website. Worthington is a very brave and compassionate English musician and photographer who has compiled a monumental archive about the prison, and he champions the cause of justice for its inmates. His website is also listed in the description. I also encourage you guys to look up the Campaign for Palestinian Rights and your local affiliates, or Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voices for Peace, groups like that. Okay, so where can you buy my Jacobo the Turko? Online, one of the best places to shop is bookshop.org, which supports independent bookstores. They can direct you to what local independent bookstores are carrying my book, or you can order it directly from Bookshop, and they will pay a share to a consortium of independent bookstores. So ask your local independent bookstore to carry it. It's going to be carried by a few here, but they're in the process of reviewing it. Excuse me. Hearts and Minds bookstore has already agreed to carry it. They are in Dallastown, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half from Newark, Delaware. You can ask Barnes & Noble or other big chains to carry it. Powell's book is a independent brick and mortar based in Portland, and it's an online alternative to Amazon. And yes, you can get it at Amazon. Leave a review. So thanks for watching my presentation. I hope you'll enjoy Jacobo the Turko, but even more important, join the struggle for Palestinian human rights. Access Andy Worthington's site and work to close Gitmo, and love one another. Peace to you all. Shalom. Ma salama.